The rain came down like the sky had split open that night, swallowing the land in sheets of water and lightning. Wind roared across the open plains of Tennessee, bending the old oak trees and rattling every window in sight. On the edge of a small farming town, a man named Elijah Carter stood at his porch, holding a rusted lantern against the storm. His farm was all he had, 200 acres of land, a weathered barn, and memories that clung to the soil like roots that refused to die. He was a quiet man in his early 50s, tall, dark-skinned, and built from years of hard labor. The storm made him uneasy. It wasn't just the weather, it was the feeling that something was coming. Something big. Just as he turned to go back inside, headlights appeared in the distance. Not one or two, but dozens. A swarm of them. The sound grew louder, roaring engines tearing through the rain, thunder mixing with the growl of motorcycles. Elijah's hand tightened around the lantern. He'd seen bikers before, but never a convoy like this. The motorcycles slowed as they reached his long gravel driveway. One by one, their headlights cut through the storm, revealing leather jackets with the same symbol on the back, a flaming skull with the words, "Hell's Angels." Elijah's heart skipped. 50 of them, maybe more. He knew what the town whispered about the Hell's Angels: trouble, chaos, and bloodshed. The kind of men who didn't knock before taking what they wanted. And now, 50 of them were heading straight toward his farm in the middle of a storm. Elijah set the lantern down and grabbed his old shotgun from behind the door. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't about to let anyone hurt his land. The lead biker, a broad man with long gray hair and a scar across his cheek, slowed his bike near the porch. He pulled off his helmet, revealing sharp blue eyes that studied Elijah through the rain. "Evenin', sir," the man shouted over the thunder. "Name's Reaper. We're caught in this mess of a storm. Roads are flooded both ways. We saw your barn, mind if we take shelter for the night?" Elijah hesitated, eyes narrowing. 50 bikers asking to sleep in his barn. It sounded like the start of a bad story. He could already imagine what the neighbors would say if they knew he'd let the Hell's Angels on his land. "The barn's old," Elijah said carefully. "Ain't much comfort in there." Reaper smiled faintly. "We've slept in worse, trust me. We ain't looking for trouble, just a roof till sunrise." The rain pounded harder. Elijah looked past him. He could see the younger bikers, drenched and shivering, their bikes barely standing in the mud. He sighed, lowered his shotgun slightly, and nodded toward the barn. "All right," he said finally. "You can use the barn. But no drinking, no fighting, and no messing with my animals. You understand?" Reaper nodded, surprisingly respectful. "Understood, sir. You got my word." As they rolled toward the barn, Elijah followed them with the lantern, watching as the massive doors swung open and the bikers pushed their motorcycles inside. The place filled quickly with noise, boots clomping on wood, rain dripping from leather jackets, low voices echoing in the dark. Elijah leaned against the doorway, uneasy. It felt strange, seeing so many men, some covered in tattoos, some missing teeth, others quiet and tired, taking refuge on his farm. Reaper noticed his discomfort and walked over. "You live out here alone?" Reaper asked. "Just me," Elijah replied. "Wife passed a few years back. Kids moved to the city." Reaper nodded slowly. "Sorry to hear that. Lost my brother last year. Hard thing, losing family." For the first time, Elijah saw something in the man's eyes, sorrow, maybe even understanding. It caught him off guard. He'd expected arrogance or aggression, not empathy. "You boys travelin' far?" Elijah asked, his tone softening. "California," Reaper said. "We're headin' to a memorial ride in Virginia. Storm caught us off guard." Elijah glanced outside, where the lightning flashed like veins across the sky. "Looks like you'll be here till morning. Roads won't clear up soon." "Appreciate you lettin' us stay," Reaper said, extending a gloved hand. Elijah hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, not threatening, just real. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up, and Elijah brought out an old pot of coffee from his kitchen, offering it to the bikers. They took it gratefully, passing mugs around and thanking him. Some of them even helped patch a hole in the barn roof where rain leaked through. Elijah watched from a distance. The more he observed, the more he realized these men weren't what the rumors painted them to be. There was laughter, quiet conversations, and even a few who knelt to pet his old farm dog, Rufus. When the power went out, the barn glowed only from lantern light and the warmth of shared stories. Elijah sat on a hay bale, listening as Reaper talked about the brotherhood, about veterans who had nowhere else to go, about men trying to find meaning after losing everything. "You ever serve?" Reaper asked. "Army," Elijah said. "Desert Storm." Reaper smiled faintly. "So was my old man. Fought in Vietnam. He used to say the uniform changes, but the pain stays the same." Elijah stared into the lantern light, lost in memories of battlefields and friends he never saw again. For the first time that night, he felt less alone. Then, around midnight, Elijah heard a sound that froze his blood, sirens in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered faintly through the sheets of rain. Reaper noticed too, his expression hardening. "Cops?" Elijah asked quietly. Reaper stood up, eyes sharp. "Could be. We ain't done nothing wrong, but small towns don't like our colors. Some of the boys have old records. They see us, they assume trouble." The sirens grew louder, closer. Elijah felt his chest tighten. If the police showed up and found 50 Hell's Angels on his property, it wouldn't matter that they were peaceful, his reputation would be destroyed. The town already whispered about him for being a black man with more land than most. This would give them something real to talk about. He looked at Reaper, then back toward the window. "You got somewhere to hide those bikes?" Reaper's eyes widened slightly. "You serious?" Elijah nodded. "My old hay shed out back. Ain't been used in years. You can park them there and keep the doors shut till morning." Reaper motioned to his crew. "Move. Keep the lights off." Within minutes, the bikers pushed their motorcycles silently through the mud, guiding them into the old shed behind the barn. Elijah helped cover the entrance with a tarp and some hay bales. By the time 2 police cruisers pulled up to the front gate, everything looked calm again. Elijah stepped onto the porch, heart pounding as an officer approached. "Evening, sir," the cop said. "We're looking for a group of bikers, Hell's Angels. Reports say they came this way." Elijah kept his face steady. "Ain't seen nobody, officer. Just me and my dog." The cop narrowed his eyes. "Mind if we look around?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You can check the road, but the field's flooded. You'll get stuck." The officers scanned the area with flashlights, then returned to their car. "If you see anything, call it in." When their taillights disappeared into the storm, Elijah finally exhaled. Reaper stepped out of the shadows, shaking his head. "You didn't have to do that." Elijah turned to him. "Didn't feel right letting them haul you off when all you needed was a dry place." Reaper's gaze softened. "You just risked your name for a bunch of strangers, Mr. Carter. Not many men would do that." Elijah shrugged. "Storm brings out what's real in people. Guess I saw enough to trust you." The barn grew quiet again as the rain began to fade. The night air felt lighter somehow, filled with the scent of wet earth and new understanding. Elijah leaned against a post, looking over the men who now sat peacefully in his barn, drinking the last of his coffee. He didn't know it yet, but by morning, one of those bikers would tell him something that would change everything he thought he knew about his past, something buried deep in the history of his land, his family, and the man he'd once lost in war. The shocking truth was only hours away. The first light of dawn crept over the Tennessee hills, painting the soaked fields gold and soft gray. The storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet hay and the faint hiss of dripping water from the barn's roof. Elijah Carter hadn't slept a wink. He sat on an overturned bucket near the barn door, sipping the last of the lukewarm coffee, his thoughts heavy but calm. The Hell's Angels had kept their word, no fighting, no drinking, no trouble. A few were already outside, wiping the mud off their bikes, checking engines, and packing up supplies. The barn looked almost too quiet now. Reaper, the leader, walked over, his leather jacket still damp but his spirit lighter. "Morning," Reaper said with a nod. "Morning," Elijah replied. "Storm let up just in time for you to hit the road." "Yeah," Reaper said, squinting toward the horizon. "We'll be out of your hair soon. But before we go, there's something you ought to hear." Elijah frowned. "What do you mean?" Reaper gestured for him to follow. They walked toward the side of the barn where one of the younger bikers, thin, nervous, maybe mid-twenties, was kneeling beside a bike with a bent handlebar. He looked up as they approached. "Elijah," Reaper said, motioning to the young man. "This here's Mason. Says he knows something about you. Or rather, about your family." Elijah blinked in confusion. "My family?" Mason stood up, hesitating before he spoke. His voice was shaky. "Sir. I think my granddad knew yours. He used to tell me stories about a man named Samuel Carter. Said he worked this very land before the war." Elijah froze. Samuel Carter. That was his father's name. "My daddy's been gone 20 years, Elijah said slowly. "You sure you got the right man?" Mason nodded. "Yeah. My granddad's name was Roy Thompson. He wasn't proud of what he did back then, but before he died, he told me to find this place someday. Said he owed a Carter his life." Elijah felt a strange heaviness in his chest. "Your granddad owed my father." Reaper crossed his arms, watching the exchange quietly. Mason took a deep breath, glancing at the others before continuing. "He told me it was back in the 60s. There was a fire at a cotton warehouse near town. Said your father, Samuel, was working the night shift. When the fire broke out, everyone ran, but Roy didn't make it out. Said Samuel went back in for him. Pulled him out right before the roof caved in. Burned his own hands doing it." Elijah swallowed hard, memories of his father's scarred hands flashing in his mind. His father never talked about how he got them, only saying, "Some debts are worth the pain." "He saved your granddad," Elijah said quietly. "Yeah," Mason replied. "And my granddad never forgot it. He always said he owed your family a debt he could never repay. Said if a Carter ever needed help, we'd give it, no questions asked." Elijah stood there, silent, rainwater dripping from the barn roof above him. It was as if time had folded in on itself, revealing a connection between two men who had lived worlds apart but shared the same code, decency. Reaper put a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Guess that debt just came around a long way, huh?" Elijah looked up, eyes glistening. "You mean to tell me, all this, last night, the storm, you showing up here, it wasn't just chance?" Reaper smiled faintly. "Maybe nothing's really chance. Maybe that storm was just a way to bring an old promise full circle." Elijah exhaled, his heart heavy with gratitude and disbelief. The bikers finished packing up, but none of them rushed to leave. Mason walked over, removing a chain from around his neck. At the end of it was a small metal tag, dull with age. "My granddad gave me this," he said, pressing it into Elijah's hand. "Said it belonged to the man who saved him. It's your father's dog tag." Elijah's hand trembled as he turned it over. The letters were faint, worn by time and sweat, S. Carter, U.S. Army. His throat tightened. "I thought these were lost when he came home." "Roy kept it all these years," Mason said softly. said it reminded him that good men come in all colors. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the open barn door. The bikers watched silently, some nodding with quiet respect. Elijah wiped at his eyes, trying to find the right words. "Your granddad, he was a good man to remember that," he said finally. "I reckon this world could use more like him." Reaper smiled, his voice low. "So could ours." Before they left, the bikers helped Elijah fix the barn roof properly. They replaced loose boards, patched holes, even mended a section of fence that had fallen during the storm. Elijah tried to refuse, but Reaper wouldn't hear it. "Let us pay our due," Reaper said firmly. "You gave us shelter when no one else would." When the engines roared back to life, Elijah stood at the edge of his driveway, watching the convoy disappear into the sunrise. 50 men on motorcycles, their jackets gleaming with the morning light. For a moment, they didn't look like outlaws, they looked like soldiers carrying a piece of history with them. Hours later, Elijah sat on his porch, the dog tag resting in his palm. Rufus lay at his feet, half asleep. The storm had cleansed more than just the land, it had cleared a piece of his heart he didn't know was burdened. He thought about his father, about how the man had worked these fields with blistered hands, never once mentioning the man he'd saved or the life he'd changed. It made Elijah wonder how many debts of kindness go unspoken, passed down through generations until fate finds a way to collect. By afternoon, a pickup truck rolled up the dirt path. It was the town sheriff, the same one who'd come by the night before. He got out, tipping his hat. "Morning, Elijah," the sheriff said. "Heard those bikers moved on." "They did," Elijah replied, leaning on the porch rail. The sheriff scratched his chin. "Just so you know, turns out they weren't running from trouble. They were escorting supplies for a veterans charity. Storm just messed up their route." Elijah blinked, surprised. "Veterans?" "Yep. Reaper, their leader, served in Afghanistan. Been leading charity rides for years. Folks don't see that part of them." The sheriff nodded politely and drove off, leaving Elijah standing there stunned. He looked back at the dog tag again, the metal warm from his palm. Reaper was a veteran. Just like his father. Just like him. That night, Elijah lit a lantern and walked back to the barn. The air was still, peaceful. He hung the dog tag from a nail above the door, letting it catch the faint glow of light. "For you, Pop," he murmured. "Guess your kindness ain't done echoing yet." As he turned to leave, he noticed something tucked under a hay bale near where Reaper had slept. It was a folded piece of paper with grease smudges on it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mr. Carter. Your father's legacy lives in you. Thank you for proving again that brotherhood isn't about patches or color, it's about heart. Reaper." Elijah smiled, his chest full. The world could be cruel, divided, suspicious. But that night had reminded him that under all the storms, there was still decency, still humanity waiting to be seen. He stepped out of the barn and looked up at the stars returning to the sky, whispering softly, "Maybe that's the real ride, Pop. Just finned in our way back to each other." And for the first time in years, Elijah Carter felt like he wasn't alone on his land anymore.